really hurt.
Years ago today, great rivals and champions Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier met for the third and final time in a fight which is immortalized forevermore as the Thriller in Manila.
And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this, hopefully, happy hump day evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. And it is not really ironic, but it is kind of on the nose that I do the clenching of the fist thing, because on this day 50 years ago, what is generally regarded to be the single greatest professional prize fight ever contested, for reasons that go beyond just two guys beating the shit out of each other in the ring, but the greatest professional boxing match took place 50 years ago in Quezon City, Philippines, October 1st, 1975. And there were so many different storylines going into this fight, and there were so many different storylines that we can focus on with regards to the fight, with regards to the two combatants. I don't know if it's possible to do justice to this in a half hour. You might not even be able to do justice to it. There have been books, 500-page books written about just this fight. So I am going to, in the immortal words of Jack Nicholson, cut past the chase and right to the outcome. And I'll just go into as much as that I think that you might be interested in about this. So just for the nuts and bolts is that this was the third fight between the two great warriors, the two great rivals, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. And Joe had taken the first, defending his heavyweight crown in what was known as the fight of the century, March 8th, 1971. And then Ali, even the ledger, defeated Joe over 12 rounds in the second fight, it's a good fight, but it's nothing like the first or third. It just showed both guys in incredible condition. You want to talk about guys with cardio that doesn't make any sense. Frazier and Ali, if you just showed a random 30 seconds from the 12th round and said, what round do you think this is? You'd be like, I don't know, the first or second. That's how fresh the guys look after, 12 rounds of going at it, nip and tuck and all of that. But a lot of things happened just for them to face off in the first place the first time. They eventually would have been on a collision course because Frazier was the Olympic champion 1964 Tokyo. Ali, as Cassius Clay, of course, the light heavyweight gold medal in Rome 1960. But Frazier did not defeat Ali for the title in the first place. Ali's title, all of his titles were stripped because of the, let's just say the legal entanglements, because he didn't want to propagandize the Vietnam War would be the most accurate way to describe it. He was never going to go over to Vietnam with a rifle in his hands. He was going to go there and he was going to tell people why we got to fight him over here so we don't fight him back home or something like that. And in good conscience, couldn't do it. He said, I know there's going to be consequences. I accept. But so he was thrown out of the sport. And then he could have gone to prison for 5 years if it wasn't for the Supreme Court, believe it or not, a unanimous verdict in 1970. This has been a gross miscarriage of justice, more or less. This is unacceptable. And they threw out, his conviction was vacated. But Frazier won the title in the interim. He defeated Jimmy Ellis, who had taken part in this bizarre round robin. I don't even know what the hell they were thinking. Ellis was the champ, and then Frazier beat him very easily. And then he took on Ali. I don't know if he was the next fight. Joe may have defended his title. I don't know when he fought Bob Foster. I know he fought Bonavena and Quarry before he won the title. But the guys met March 8, 1971, and Joe came out on top. A real tough back and forth fight, but he certainly sealed it with a big knockdown at the beginning of the 15th. It looked like both guys could have gone another 5 rounds there. Again, the conditioning was stupendous. But by the time of the Thrilla in Manila, October 1, 1975, both guys were well past what you could reasonably call their best. And the Ali of the 70s, he was still really good, but he was not the dynamic force in the ring that he had been in the 60s, where he was doing things in there between 64, when he won the title from Sonny Liston, who was thought to be unbeatable, but until 67, when that was his last fight against Zora Foley before his exile period. He had the 3.5 years out of the sport. It kind of dulled his shine. It made Ali still a very formidable force, but more beatable. But even within the context of that, there are fights in the 70s where he looks almost as good as, let's say, the Ali that beat Cleveland Williams. It's considered his most skillful performance. It's not really his best performance, because Williams was kind of past it himself. But just to see the kind of dazzling array of different skills that Ali had, at his disposal in the 60s. But the Ali of the 70s, there were 3 fights in particular where he just looked phenomenal. The first was the second fight with Ken Norton. Kenny had busted his jaw in their first fight. And obviously it's pretty impressive that Ali was able to go 12 rounds. He claims the jaw was broken in the first round. I don't know how the hell he wasn't screaming in pain. Maybe he was in too much pain to be screaming in pain. I don't know. But the second fight with Norton, he had to win that fight to kind of keep his comeback on track, because that was his second loss, the Norton split decision. And he looked incredible in that fight. It was still a close fight, and there were some people that thought, well, maybe Kenny should have got the nod. But he was real fast, and it was a great performance. Obviously, the Foreman fight was out of this world. The Frazier fight, the second one, was another great performance by Ali. And then the Ron Lyle fight, which was Ali's second title defense after winning the title from Foreman, who had destroyed Frazier. That's how George got the title. Styles make fights. Ali and Foreman were always going to fight tough fights if they had fought a number of times, because the styles suggested that they were going to have similar kinds of fights. The style for Joe Frazier, Foreman, was just all bad. He just didn't have any process by which he could win, because George was just so much bigger. And I'm not so sure if Joe lands his big left hook. Maybe George takes a backward step, but I don't know. George could really take a hell of a shot, as we saw. But Ali looked really good in the Ron Lyle fight. But by the time you got to October 1st, he had personal problems, and the battles were starting to wear on him in other ways. His coordination wasn't quite what it had been, let's say, when he defeated Foreman a year or so, about 11 months prior. So there was an argument that Ali should have already been retired, but he looked really good in the Lyle fight. Remember, Lyle knocked down George Foreman twice, came this close to knocking George out. I mean, the ref could have stopped the fight in Lyle's favor after that second knockdown. I think today, George, he got up, but I don't think that fight would have been allowed to continue had something like that happened today. So Ali had a lot of personal problems. There were a lot of things going on. His marriage to Belinda was ending, which is something that happens, but the way that he was handling it, you could argue, was not really the best, because he brought his future bride, Veronica. Veronica, for those that don't know, that's Layla Ali's mom. He was introducing Veronica to Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos as his wife. Now, I'm pretty sure they weren't married at that point. I think legally he was still married to Belinda, not his first wife. Belinda was his second. I'm sorry. Sonia Roy was his first wife back in the 1963 era. So Belinda showed up, and I don't blame her. Not that it matters whether someone like me blames her, but she showed up, and they had like screaming matches in the presidential suite. And she wasn't going to back down. They had known each other for more than a decade already. So I don't know how he was able to stay focused, how he was able to kind of will himself to even get in the ring. I mean, given what happened, he could have canceled the fight and said, you know what, Joe, I'm sorry. I can't go through with this. Look, my whole life is falling apart and it's my fault. None of that happened. They had screaming matches. She may have just left. I think that she did. She just came in to kind of have it out with him, and then she left. And so the Ali that went into the ring on October 1st, 1975, there were other things on his mind, but he did have an ability to be very narrow in his thinking, to kind of have that sort of in a box, a tunnel vision, if you will. And he was fully focused on Frazier. But here's the thing. Now, Frazier, the idea was that Joe was done. He was washed up because he really hadn't looked that good after the Foreman fight, which had taken place about 2 2/3, years prior. And there was an idea that Joe was through. And so Ali thought, because he was at least knew that he could go deep into the fight. He wasn't worried about his own cardio, but he thought that Joe was diminished enough where even a diminished Ali, I think I can get him early. I think I can maybe, catch him with a big shot and get Joe out of here early. But from a broader sense, when you think about these two guys getting ready to square off for the third and what ended up being the final time, there was talk in 76, Frazier's like, I want him again. We've had these great fights. Let's do it again. There wasn't any reason. They couldn't top the third fight, no matter who you were pulling for. But from a broader sense, there is an idea, and in some cases it's true, where certain historical sporting figures, there's a mythology, and they are almost, younger people may start to think they couldn't, like, this is overblown. They're overstating the case about this person, about that person. How good would Babe Ruth be today? Whatever it might be. It doesn't just have to be boxing. But in the case of Ali, I think that the reporting current day is accurate. I think that it's as close to accurate as it can be, depending on what you want to focus on. There are so many different kinds of performances, so many different kinds of fight nights at various points in his career where you can point to illustrate. You can illustrate this: the blazing speed, Cleveland Williams fight, the power, the Zora Foley fight, the ability to take a big shot and keep moving forward, the first fight with Frazier, the third fight with Frazier, the fight with Foreman, the fight with Lyle. Hell, Henry Cooper pulling himself up off the ground when Henry almost knocked him through the ring when he was only a 21-year-old wet behind the ears kid at Wembley Stadium in 63. But when people say, whether you liked Ali, whether you never really came around, and even historically there could be young people who learn about the stance he took in the 60s and say, that's bullshit, he should have gone to prison, whatever. But when people say this was somebody who, there was something just different with him, and Mike Tyson, obviously you've seen him. Mike gets emotional usually when he talks about Ali, because Mike loved Frazier too, but it was different. Mike actually fought Joe's son, so he beat him in about 45 seconds. But he loved Ali, and he chokes up because he sees Ali as a different kind of an individual, different kind of person, certainly than Mike. They lived totally different lives, but that he was just wired in a way that you can't explain. Why was he willing to die in the ring? Why was it that important? They talk about fighters going out on their shield, and both Ali and Joe Frazier had that mindset where they were just willing to let it go and all that in the ring. But when you look at, for example, the first fight with Frazier, and Arthur McCanty, the referee of that fight, has talked about this. Joe lands this howitzer left hook. How did he have the energy to throw that punch? His eyes were puffed up. He could barely see. And Mercanti said he lands this home run, this howitzer left hook, and Ali goes flying. And in my head, I'm thinking, the fight's over. But I got to get Joe away from Muhammad. I'm not going to have any long counts or anything stupid. I grab Joe and I direct him to the neutral corner. And then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to pick up the count. I turn around, the guy's standing there. Ali's on his feet, ready to go. He didn't understand how that was possible. Now, Ali may have been knocked unconscious by that punch, but 5 seconds later, he's on his feet. And if you look at the historical record of that, he's up at the count of 3. And then he fights the rest of the round like he's still trying to win a boxing match. That's what can't be explained. And when you look at the Thrilla in Manila, you look at the way the two guys, they start off, there's a lot of joking, there's a lot of laughs, and Frazier is giving it to Ali. Ali tried to get him early. He did this thing. Ali used to do this thing where he would put his left paw, his jab, but he wouldn't throw it. Not even the Roberto Duran, where Duran would do that thing where he was throwing short jabs like as a rangefinder to try to time his opponent. That's not what I'm talking about. But Ali used to occasionally, he would put his left paw in the direction of his opponent's face. And you're in the heat of battle. You don't think, well, what's he doing here? You're not processing. He's trying to set me up to take my head off. So Ali did this thing. I think it was in the first round, but it was no later than the second, where he puts his paw in Frazier's face and he kind of wiggles his hand, and the audience is laughing. They think it's farce. They think it's funny. And it looks funny. If you watch it, you might now, if you watch the fight for the first time, there are some really great high definition copies available on YouTube. You might laugh and say, hey, this is pretty funny. But he wasn't just doing it. He hadn't done it to Frazier before. So he sticks his paw out. Frazier smacks his hand down, but he keeps his guard up. Ali does it again. Frazier puts it down, keeps his guard up. The third time that Ali does that thing, Frazier is angry now. He's thinking to himself, why is he doing this? What an asshole, or whatever he's thinking. He smacks it down, but he doesn't bring his guard back up. And Ali lands one of the best punches, one of the cleanest shots that he ever landed in his career. I mean, if I'm asked, what's the single best punch Ali ever landed in his career? It's the shot that knocked Carl Mildenberger to where Mildenberger not only somersaulted on the ground, but as he started to get up, he hopped as if his body was still vibrating from getting hit so hard. Because Mildenberger ran in, he came rushing in. You don't do that in boxing. He came running in to try to get at Ali, and Ali it was a perfect shot. Fight continued. The punch that knocked out Foreman, it's not really a knockout. George is on his feet at the count of 8. I don't know what Zach Clayton, although a lot of people said it's good that the fight stopped, there was no reason for George to continue. But George got up, in time, and Zach Clayton just waved the fight over. The shot that he landed against Frazier that I'm talking about, Frazier staggered. He staggered, and Ali followed up through a fusillade of punches, but he couldn't land a second decisive blow to, at least knock Joe down. In 3 fights, that might be the closest that Joe came to getting knocked down. As some people would say, Tony Perez making the mistake I think it was the second round of the return fight at Madison Square Garden in 74, where Ali landed a right and Frazier seemed to stagger, and there's 40 seconds left in the round, and Tony Perez thought he heard the bell and he separated the fighters. And they're like, well, Ali might have gotten him. Come on. There's nothing to indicate that Frazier was just going to suddenly drop. So Ali lands this huge bomb. Frazier staggers, but he covers, and Ali can't follow up. And at the end of that round, Joe did something he was not known for. He was not a guy who goofed off and played around in the ring, even though, yes, they're both trying to bash each other to hamburger. But Frazier, with his glove, kind of mimed that he was going to pull Ali's trunks down. And that's something that Frazier didn't do, but it was his way of saying, you tricked me, champ, but I ain't going anywhere. You're in for a long night. So am I, but you're in for a long night. So the form of this fight, it was similar to the first and second, but second not to as great of an extent, because Ali started strong in 71, but Joe was still landing big shots to the side. Ali must have had something with his liver where he was able to get hit in the liver and act like it was not a big deal. That's another thing that doesn't make sense. Foreman landed a liver shot in Zaire with every ounce of power behind it. And George even talked about it. He started backing up, waiting for Alex. I'll give him room to fall. And 2 seconds later, he goes, is that all you got? Another thing that doesn't make sense, right? So the first fight, Ali started strong. Frazier came on. Then Ali seemed to be winning, and then Frazier rallied, and Frazier won for sure 4 of the last 5 rounds. Ali was real strong in the 14th, seemed to be getting the better of Joe, and then obviously the knockdown. But the second fight, Frazier seemed to take the middle rounds, but he wasn't landing the same kind of decisive blows that he did in the first fight, and then Ali finished strong. It was an 8-4 fight if I had a scorecard. But in Manila, Ali started strong, and he probably won 4 of the first 5 rounds. But Ken Norton, Ali's old nemesis, they had fought twice already, but Norton loved Ali. Just when they were in the ring, he's trying to win a fight. He thought that Ali was weakening as early as the 6th round, and he said it to Don Dunphy, who was doing the play-by-play. Norton was doing the color commentary. And Ali later said he felt like quitting after the 9th round. The 9th round, he felt like quitting. He said, I don't even know if I could continue. But there was something in him. And this is what I was talking about, where if you want to talk toughness, if you want to say old school warrior ethos, and you understand this is not a soldier in combat where their life is in danger. Although you could argue that these two guys, they were so focused and so committed on getting the better of each other. It wasn't so much for Ali's title. It was for the championship of each other. And each guy, they wouldn't have said it the same way, but each guy was willing to die that night. There was no question that each guy had made his peace with the fact, if this is how I go, well, I go with my great rival, Joe, or you know what? I go with the lip. I go with the lip. We both go down tonight, but neither one of us is going to give an inch. We are not going to quit. And what is it that pulled Joe Frazier up off the floor in Kingston, Jamaica against Foreman? He had to have been unconscious by the second knockdown, and he keeps bouncing up, smacking his gloves. Come on, George. How? I don't know. These are the kinds of things I'm talking about that are not overstated. This is all real. This all happened. There was something in Ali that it's not that he wouldn't quit. It's that he wouldn't yield. He wouldn't even admit to himself that he could lose. He always believed he was going to win. So as horrendous as he felt as he went back to his corner after the 9th round, and Dundee talked about this too, it looked like my guy was spent. But sometime in that 60 seconds, he got up. It's like he put in a new battery. And he went out there in the 10th round, and Joe had his moments in the 10th, and Ali was so tired, he had trouble defending himself. He started defending his side, and he was barely able to lift his arms enough to cover his head, and Joe was just wailing away at him. Don Dunphy even says it was either the 10th or the 11th. Joe teeing off on Ali right now, like he almost couldn't believe what he was looking at. But Frazier, the damage to Frazier's face was just getting worse round by round. And Ali knew this, and Ali's corner and Bundini Brown screaming all kinds of stuff at him to try to motivate him, but he didn't need the motivation. Yeah, sorry, another kind of herky-jerky episode where I had to record it multiple times. Apologies. But as I was saying, despite the obvious exhaustion, Ali just seemed to have this ability to at least temporarily recharge. And not long after appearing to not be able to raise his gloves, he's throwing from every angle. And once it gets to the 12th round, if you were to watch the fight, once it gets to the 12th round, Frazier's eyes are just about swelled shut. They both are. And he could only pretty much see a blur, and then he really couldn't see much of anything. Maybe he had 5 to 10% vision after the 12th round. And the depths that both guys went to in rounds 13 and 14. Ali thought that he was going to die, but he's still trying to win a boxing match, as George Foreman would say. George would always break it down to, you just try to win a boxing match. George was just trying to win, and Ali was just trying to win, and he just wouldn't stop. He would not stop throwing punches, and Joe would not stop moving forward and crowding Ali and just going all out to try and stop him. You know, land one big hook, one big left hook. And you can hear Ali's corner screaming, watch the one left hook. You know, the kind of punch that floored him in the first fight. But, you know, Joe's eyes didn't look so good in the first fight at the end, but they were not swelled shut as they were here. So rounds 13 and 14 are somehow inspiring and devastating. And they hurt. Because you know that, as Ali famously said, Joe and me, we entered the ring that night in Manila as champions. We left as old men. And Joe was only 31 and Muhammad was only 33, but truer words were never spoken. And the 13th and 14th rounds, Ali landed everything. I don't know where he was getting the ability, but he is throwing and landing at will. And in the 14th round, you can even hear, I mean, they had some weird people doing the fight. Flip Wilson, they had doing part of the color commentary. He didn't really say that much. Flip Wilson was an actor. But at one point, Ali is just measuring Joe, and he's just blasting away. And he's throwing short, controlled power shots. He's not winding up, because I don't think he could wind up at that point. And he lands this, he sets Joe up for a punch. He lands a punch, and you can hear Flip Wilson screaming, "Go down, Joe, go down." There was an idea at ringside that Frazier might die. So at the end of the 14th, Ali, it looked like he was having trouble getting back to his corner. But to be fair to him, 2 years later, and it was just an anniversary of this, when Ali fought Ernie Shavers, Ali barely made it back to his corner at the end of the 14th round, but somehow 60 seconds later, he jumped up like it was the first round, according to Ernie Shavers. But Ali went back to his corner after 14 with a look on his face like, I don't think I can go any further. He was so exhausted. And when Joe got back to his corner, Eddie Futch, his chief second, his trainer, had enough. Joe had gone out there, and for the last 6 minutes, he was literally a punching bag. And he couldn't really throw punches with any force. And Futch said, kid, I'm stopping it. I got to stop the fight. And Joe kept saying, no, I want him, boss. I want him, boss. Let me go back out there. And Futch put his hand on him. He said, son, no one will ever forget what you did out here today. And nobody will ever forget what Joe did and what Muhammad did on that just sweltering, and it was 90 degrees in the ring. How did they not pass out from heat prostration by round 8? There were all of these things where you put them in the mental meat grinder and you say, how? How is it possible that these two greats of the sport had the kinds of styles that allowed them to fight these wars? 3 fights that could have gone either way. Well, not really the first one so much, but 3 fights which were hotly contested, and the guys were evenly matched. And at various points of each fight, the person who ended up losing looks like they're going to win. Because that moment in this fight, when Don Dunphy shouts, Frazier teeing off on Ali, it looks like Joe has taken control of the fight, but then all of a sudden, Joe is on the receiving end and he can't see. So the thing with records is that it's not that they're misleading, but in the case of Ali, his final record is good. It's 56-5. But he was 55-2 after defeating Ernie Shavers. And, his 2 losses were both very tough fights. The first fight with Norton, which, as I said, he got his jaw broken, depending on who's telling the story, either in the first round or later in the fight. And obviously, the fight of the century against Smokin' Joe. But he was 55-2 with his 2 losses being very, very tough, tight, back and forth fights, not fights where he got, beat up or knocked unconscious or beaten from here to there. So he just went on too long. And many of the greats went on too long, whether it was Joe Louis, whether it was Ali, whether it was, sadly, Mike Tyson or Roy Jones Jr., even more sadly. It's just the nature of the sport. You don't want to admit that you can't do it anymore. In the case of Ali, it was a little bit different because he made so much money. Even for the 60s, 70s, and 80s, his total purses were supposedly something like $63 million. But there was an idea that people may have been siphoning money from him, and maybe he didn't have as much as he should have had. And that was one theory as to why he continued to fight. But really, with the exception of the worst beating he ever took to me is the Shavers fight, where Ernie was just winding up and loading up all night and landing. But Ali did enough to win that fight, I thought, cleanly, 9-6. Or maybe, 8-6 with 1 even, or 7-6 with 2 even. But I thought Ali did, in fact, outpoint Ernie. The last 3 fights that he lost, the first fight to Spinks, shouldn't have been out there. But it was a representable heavyweight title fight. If you didn't know who was fighting, it was an exciting fight. Then he beat Spinks in the return. And then there was the rumors that his health had deteriorated, which ended up being true. And he should not have been licensed to box Larry Holmes, his old sparring partner who adored him. And, Larry, I hate to say Larry took it easy on him, but Larry could have done a lot more damage than he did. He seemed to be pulling his punches after a certain point. He said, I don't think Muhammad's guy, I don't think he can hurt me here. And in Ali's last fight, the fact that he was still fighting, he went against Trevor Berbick, who is one of the guys who fought Holmes, he fought Tyson, and he fought Ali. And the irony of the Berbick fight, it was that Ali almost won it. He fought Berbick to a standstill, and Berbick ended up winning the heavyweight championship 5 years later. And Tyson obviously demolished him, knocked him down. It was five knockdowns from the same punch. But October 1st, 1975, as I say, it's so difficult to encapsulate. It's so difficult to put into words. But if you watch the fight, if you're a young person who maybe thought the kind of mythology of Muhammad Ali was overinflated because of his very important standing as a civil rights figure, an equality figure, somebody who, tried to give voice to the oppressed, all of this stuff is true. But if you watch this fight, you watch the fight with Foreman, even in a loss against Joe Frazier, you'll get it. You'll understand why the mythology in his case is just about exactly right. He burned to win more than just about anybody in any sport. And the sport of boxing, gladiator type thing, one-on-one, you can't blame anyone else but yourself if you come up short. But October 1st, 1975, 50 years ago today, in Manila, the Philippines, the thriller in Manila. It was Ali who came up with that. The full quote was, "It will be a thriller and a killer and a chiller when I get the gorilla in Manila." It really wasn't very nice that he called Joe Frazier a gorilla. I mean, come on. Joe Frazier was a fucking monster fighter, a great guy, but eventually the two guys set aside their differences. It was more that Frazier didn't like Ali for all of the yapping and all of the nonsense with the nicknames and the stupid stuff like that. But those were two of the great warriors of the sport, two of the best heavyweights who ever lived. And they brought out, you could say, the best and the worst of each other. Each inflicted so much permanent damage on the other. But as fans, you can't do it any better than those guys did in their three epic contests, and especially the thriller in Manila. This has been episode 618 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your happy hump day here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.